Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Rago.
I'm Evan Netsch. We're here in Hatteras at my home spot.
Yeah, Evan's place right now. Living the dream, kiting, surfing. But we're going to do a quick interview, get some dialogue going. I wanted to ask you about these two boards. We're going to do kind of like a wood versus carbon when it pertains to the Xcaliber, which is a board that you use often, right?
Yeah, so these are actually kind of my two personal boards that I use a lot. And yeah, one's carbon, one's wood. They're both different sizes, but kind of depending on the day, depending what I'm doing, I'd use either one of these as my go-to boards from Cabrina.
Breaking into it, I guess, could you give us like a quick, down and dirty, what are the major differences when you go for a wood board or a carbon board, and why might you choose one?
So I think the main difference is, the wood board's gonna be a little bit of a smoother ride.
Yep.
It's gonna be a little bit flexier, cut through chop a little bit better, a little easier on your knees, where the carbon might be a little bit more performance oriented, take a little bit of a harder landing, slightly more pop, and just, it's that same outline, a lot of the same performance characteristics, but this one's just gonna be a little bit more of an aggressive riding board, for sure.
Right, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in my experience, when I have used older versions of the wood versus carbon, like with wood, it's kind of like a damper feel, like a little softer, right?
Sure, yeah.
And then when you go to the carbon, you can kind of feel like that pop, you can literally feel it like on the tail when you're like, am I correct in that?
Yeah, I think I probably get a little more feedback, I'd say,
That's a good word.
out of the carbon board. But at the same time, that feedback can be, a little more abrasive on you, especially if you're in like a really heavy chop situation. You're going to feel all that, and it's going to be a little bit. It's like having a car just with stiffer suspension in it.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. I like that.
Yeah. So I've got both of these boards. I actually use them both, I'd say, equally, depending on different days. Carbon's the 138, so for me, this is more of like my freestyle board. If I'm unhooking, if I'm doing tricks, I'm landing hard. I want one a little bit of a bigger board. Maybe the wind's a little bit lighter, better lighter wind, bigger surface area for landing. A little more pop, and just a more, a stiffer shape, or a stiffer flex profile rather, just for taking heavier landings.
For sure, and you're doing like foot strap freestyle as well, correct?
I kind of go back and forth, honestly. Like this board, I'd say maybe it's a little bit small for me for riding boots, but I do ride boots on this one a lot. And again, I think that's where I definitely want that stiffer board, is when I do ride boots.
Totally.
I'd say as I'm getting older, I'm probably not riding boots as much, but I still do put boots on this board. Especially a couple years ago, this was kind of like my dedicated boot board, and now it's kind of evolved. I ride straps on it a bit more than I have in the past. But yeah, no, I've actually been riding the 138 carbon Xcaliber for I don't know how many years, a lot of years, and this has been my go-to board, and I really love it a lot. This size, that construction.
It's actually a really efficient board too. I'm actually like one of those guys that rides big boards. Like I was riding a 147 all last year, which to most people sounds ridiculously huge, but it was really rockered out, kind of more park focused. I actually tried Damo's 138 Xcaliber down in Florida this winter, and the efficiency of a board like that, like this board is so stupid efficient, like really, really fast. Like it didn't feel like a small 138.
Yeah.
Not that that's small to most people, but to me it sounds like a small board, but yeah, it worked really well.
Yeah, for me, this is like, if I was to have one board, this is the board. But no, like you said, I think a lot of people, especially now, have been going bigger and bigger on their board sizes, especially for park riding or whatever, in boots with a lot of rocker. But this board's definitely a more efficient outline, and it maybe rides a little big for its size. Like when you get on, even like this one is smaller, the 135.
Yeah.
It feels like it's got a little more board to it than a 135.
I would agree.
But yeah, so this is the wood one, the 135, and I ride the wood in a slightly smaller size, because normally if I'm riding the 135, it's going to be that super windy day. I'm boosting big, I'm doing kite loops, I'm riding through, marsh and channels and stuff here in Hatteras. And one, I want to be on a smaller board because I'm not unhooking. I don't really care about that extra, board, surface area for landing. And it's super windy. I'm like maxed out on a 9 meter. It's usually really choppy, and I want something just a little bit more forgiving usually for those days.
Makes perfect sense.
Hooked in riding, lit up, then I kind of go for this Xcaliber wood. And sometimes we do pretty long downwinders too, and it gets pretty choppy and pretty gnarly. And one feels just a little bit smoother on the knees. Like if I rode this in carbon, I'd be super happy as well. But I think towards the end of that downwind run, sometimes you're hurting a lot anyways, and this just makes me at least hurt a little bit less.
Yeah.
being on the wood version.
That's cool. I love some of the points that you brought up as well. I think it's like a good opportunity just to share some things with people on there. Like you mentioned, like sometimes when riders are doing things a bit more powered and they're landing harder, a lot of guys like the bigger board because they got the extra surface area to land on.
Yeah.
A lot of guys will break like the water with their tail to kind of like soften up like the impact. But when you're doing more big air, when you're lit, like a big board can be kind of unbearable when you're like just lit on a 9, and if you're doing more floaty tricks and like the heli loops and kind of coming down like that, having like a smaller board, it's almost like two different sports, and it's interesting how the tools will change for like depending on what you're doing.
No, for sure. I'd say when I'm on this board, I usually come down, even though it is that much windier and you're super powered, I'm usually coming down really, really soft.
You're using the kite.
Or I'm coming down ridiculously hard and out of control. And at that point, I just want the board away from me.
Which, you do see a lot with the bigger air riders where they come down and they're kicking the board out, or they hit and they're just and you just fall onto your back.
So, I mean, I could honestly like be happy with either of these boards. I think in either construction, either size. But this kind of combo, I think for me is kind of what makes sense.
Yeah, and
for what I'm doing.
I think there's benefits to both. I think for somebody who might be newer and they're not going out and riding powered, something like a 138, even a 140, 141 is kind of nice because it's a little extra board for them to land on. They can ride a slightly smaller kite and still kind of make up for the lack of power and learn tricks. This is just my 2 cents when I think about these things and talk to people. Somebody skilled like you might really, really love the 135 all the time. That's what a lot of people are gravitating towards is smaller boards because they want to be able to hold down all that power.
Yeah.
But just things to think about, throw it out there.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree too. I think most people would probably enjoy the wood version, maybe a little more in the carbon, just because it is a little smoother, maybe a little more well-rounded in that sense of if you're going out in super choppy conditions or you don't. The carbon's great, but you are sacrificing a little bit of just nice smooth ride for some performance. Where I think for a lot of people, myself included, on a lot of days, I don't need that stiff carbon feel. Yeah, I want a little bit of that smoother wood feel. So.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember too with like modern kiteboarding gear, like the average person is never going to outgrow the most basic product, and not that this is a basic product at all, because this is obviously your freestyle board. But just in general, when you're looking at wood versus carbon and different kites, like it's pretty hard to like max out the potential of our gear.
You could put a beginner on this board, and
they'd be ripping.
It doesn't make a difference.
Doesn't matter.
But you can really appreciate some of the better qualities in it.
Absolutely, I love that snappy feel of carbon for sure. And I do the same. I bounce back and forth between wood and carbon boards, and when I have a carbon one to play with and the water's flat, it's like magic.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yep, absolutely.
Well, cool, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you did, hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the video. We'll catch you next time.